My commanding officer mother claimed I had a behavioral defect and injected me with experimental drugs for a covert research program. I exposed her and got her court-martialed. Now she's up for parole and someone just threatened to eliminate my sister if I don't stay silent. The first time I gave Ava the injection, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My name is Raina. I'm 12 years old. I live on a military base in northern Alaska where winter lasts 9 months, and the sun sometimes forgets to rise. My mother, Captain Sloan, runs the place like a warship. Strict curfews, daily drills, no exceptions. Not even for family. Especially not for family. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. I remember because that morning I got to school late, and the instructor made me run laps until my lungs burned. When I finally got back to the barracks, Mom was waiting, her uniform still crisp despite the snow melting on her shoulders. "Sit," she said, already loading the injector. "Ava had an outburst today." My sister Ava was 16. She used to trace constellations on the ceiling with a flashlight and whisper ghost stories when the lights were out. But lately she'd stopped smiling. "Stop talking, really? I thought she was just tired." "She failed her psyche val," Mom went on. "It was violent. She screamed and tried to break the equipment. I've spoken with command. She needs stability. She'll be on daily regulation from now on." I stared at the injector. It looked like a silver marker, cold and heavy. "What kind of regulation?" "Medication," she said flatly. "Stabilizers. You'll administer them. It'll help her stay level." "Why me?" "Because she trusts you. And because I said so." That was how it started. No explanations. Just orders. I didn't know what the injections were. I didn't ask. You don't ask questions in our family. You salute. You obey. And I did. Every evening at 1900 hours, I met Ava in the little medroom next to the barracks shower stalls. She never fought me. Just sat there with this hollow look in her eyes, like whatever made her Ava had already gone somewhere else. She stopped humming in the mornings, stopped reading. Her laughter, the kind that used to echo through the walls when we whispered Morse code jokes under our covers, was just gone. One night, maybe 2 weeks into the injections, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard in a long time, Ava's voice. She was crouched next to my bunk, whispering like someone being hunted. "Ray," she said, trembling. "I think I'm dying." "What?" "I can't feel anything anymore. My skin, my thoughts, you. I'm still here, but it's like I'm under glass. Please, can we skip it? Just one night." I sat up. Her eyes were wet, not with tears but with something worse, desperation. I thought about the way she used to make shadow puppets on the wall, how we'd tap code to each other when Mom was on night watch. I nodded. That night I loaded the injector, pressed it to her arm, and didn't push the plunger. I pulled away and logged the dose like normal. Ava whispered, "Thank you," and crawled back into her bunk. That was the first time I lied for her. The first time I disobeyed an order. And it wouldn't be the last. The change in Ava wasn't instant, but it was impossible to miss. It started with her eyes. For weeks they'd been distant, dull, like she was looking through me instead of at me. But 2 days after I stopped giving her the injections, she caught me sneaking an extra ration bar and smirked. "You know that's my brand," she said, raising one eyebrow. I froze. Then we both laughed. A short, surprised laugh like someone had cracked a window in a sealed room. I didn't realize how much I missed that sound until it was back. From that night on, things felt alive again. Ava was sharper, quicker with her jokes. She beat me at code games 3 nights in a row, tapping out riddles in the dark that had me squinting at the wall like an idiot. We whispered about sneaking off base someday, maybe to Seattle or somewhere warmer, somewhere with real trees. "I want to taste fruit that didn't come from a foil pouch," she said once, pulling the blanket over our heads like we were little again. "Think they have bananas down there?" "I heard they grow on trees," I whispered back. She nudged me. "Liar." We started stashing things. A half-used flashlight, a thermal scarf, a keycard she swiped from an unattended desk. It wasn't a plan yet, just hope. Quiet, dangerous hope. Then it all shattered. It was a Wednesday. We were up late again, tapping messages under the covers. I just told her a story about one of the officers slipping on ice and falling face first into a snowbank when the door slammed open. Lights. Captain Sloan stood there in full uniform, the hallway glow outlining her like a shadow made of metal. I dropped the flashlight. Ava froze. For a second she tried to pretend, flattened her face, let her eyes go blank like before. But it was too late. The smirk hadn't faded fast enough. Mom's eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything, just turned and walked out. The next morning Ava was gone. Her bunk was perfectly made, the sheets folded into sharp corners like she'd never been there. Her boots were gone. So was her bracelet, the one with the little gear charm from Dad's flight jacket. Only the pillow smelled like her, cold pine and the peppermint gum she chewed when she was anxious. Captain Sloan told me during breakfast formation. She self-harmed, she said, flat as ice. Commands moved her to a secure facility off base for observation. I didn't ask where. I knew I wouldn't get an answer. I spent the whole day in a fog. Couldn't eat, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I barely noticed the cold until I got back to our barracks and dropped my glove. When I reached under Ava's bunk to grab it, my fingers brushed metal. A screw from the air vent. Loose. I pulled it open. Inside, wedged between layers of dust and a crumpled sock, was Ava's journal. A thick, beat-up notebook covered in duct tape and faded code scribbles. I flipped it open with shaking hands. Page after page, messy, frantic writing. Fragments. Warnings. Names I didn't recognize. And one sentence circled twice in red ink. Mom wants me quiet. She hates that I look like him. I don't think Dad's death was accidental. I sat on the floor, holding the journal in my lap, and felt something break inside me. Whatever this was, it was bigger than I thought. And I wasn't just scared anymore. I was angry. I read every page that night. Curled up in Ava's bunk with the blankets pulled tight, I went through her journal like it was a survival manual. The handwriting was messy in places, like she'd been writing in a rush or maybe while hiding. Whole sections were crossed out. Others written in code we'd made up as kids, half Morse, half nonsense. But I understood most of it. At the start, it read like a normal log. Dates, weird dreams, stuff about the injections. But by the middle, it turned sharp, dark. Ava had been documenting everything, shifts in our mother's behavior, odd entries in base scheduling, even visitors she wasn't supposed to know about. One name came up again and again. Commander Healy. I didn't know who he was. I'd never heard the name spoken aloud. But Ava had circled it twice next to a note that said, Healy visited twice before Dad's accident. Last time, Mom screamed at him behind the old ops shed. Another line, dated a few days before she disappeared, was even worse. Mom wants me quiet. She hates that I look like him. I don't think Dad's death was accidental. I stared at that sentence until the words blurred. It didn't feel real. Mom never talked about Dad. He died 2 years ago in a training accident. We were told his transport crashed during a snowstorm, no survivors. Ava never believed it, said the base logs didn't line up, said the wreckage was cleaned too fast. I always thought she was just grieving different than me. Now I wasn't sure. The next morning, while the rest of the squad was in the field for snow drills, I stayed back under the excuse of a stomach bug. I waited until the barracks were empty, then started searching. I went through Ava's drawers, her old bunk frame, the crawl space behind the lockers. Nothing. But then I remembered the mattress. Ava once told me it was a good place to hide contraband because the officers never checked under the lining. Too many complaints about bed bugs. I peeled back the edge, cutting the seam with my training knife. That's where I found them. A thin folder tucked between layers of foam, 3 forged military memos, redacted reports, and 2 digital psychiatric assessments with Captain Sloan's ID signature. They weren't real. The formatting was wrong. The seals were low-res, probably copied from some outdated file. One of the reports had a date stamp that didn't exist. July 14, 22. Military logs don't use that format. They never had. Ava had been right. She'd been framed. That evening, just before lights out, Mom came into my room. Suit up, she said. We're adjusting your schedule. From now on, you'll be receiving regulation injections too. My blood went cold. What? Why? Early signs, she said, calm as ever. I've seen your file. Emotional instability, insomnia. Same as Ava. She pulled the injector from her coat pocket and handed it to me. You can administer it yourself, she added. You've had enough practice. I nodded, took the injector, watched her leave. Then I locked the door. My hands were shaking as I uncapped it. I looked at the plunger, imagined the serum crawling into my veins, flattening everything, turning me into a ghost. Instead, I reached for my old comms wristband, the one Ava and I used when we were kids to play spy games. I hit the record button, pointed it at my face. This is Raina Sloan, I whispered. Date, March 12th. Time, 2,200 hours. I am being ordered to inject an unknown compound under false psychiatric pretenses. I am not complying. I pressed the injector against my arm, then spit the serum into a heat pack and flushed it down the barrack sink. The wristband blinked red. Recording saved. They wanted to sedate me, silence me, erase me like they tried with Ava. But I wasn't going quiet. Not anymore. I spent the next week pretending to fall apart. Each morning, I made my movements slower, my speech duller. When I walked the corridors, I let my posture slump just enough to pass for medicated compliance. It was surprisingly easy. No one questioned it, not when they thought I was becoming what Ava had been. I stopped eating in the mess hall. I said the food made me nauseous. Really, I didn't want to risk contamination. I kept a stash of ration packs Ava had hidden under the water heater. I ran all of it through a portable filtration straw I'd scavenged from an old emergency pack. I wasn't paranoid. Not after what I found in the corner of the supply room, a box marked Nutrition Reserve, with a second label beneath, Regulation Dosage Monitoring, Lot 38K, the same lot stamped on the bottom of my dinner tray the week before. They weren't just using the injections. They were dosing us through food. On the 5th day, I scraped a chunk of protein loaf into a vacuum seal pouch. It smelled faintly metallic, like copper and acid. I planned to have it tested, but I needed help. There was only one person who knew encryption, coding, and had a habit of fixing things when no one else would. Ellis. He was a technician, quiet, steady, always tinkering with circuit boards in the back of the comms room. Ava used to say he was the only adult on base who didn't treat us like malfunctioning machines. I caught him in the comms bay during off hours. The others were at a meeting and he was rewiring a terminal board. Ellis, I said, stepping into the doorway. I need help, but you can't ask questions. He looked up, eyebrows raised. Is this about Ava? I paused. You know, he sighed. I know something wasn't right, and I know you've been walking around like a girl with a ticking clock in her head. So yeah, I'm listening. I pulled out the journal, the pouches, the forged memos. His face didn't change as he flipped through them, just a slow, steady nod. When he got to the part about the food, he blinked once. They're testing compliance thresholds, he said quietly. Behavioral weapons. That's what this is. What kind of weapons? He didn't answer, just stood and opened the cabinet behind him. Inside was a portable analysis scanner, the kind used for soil samples or checking radiation levels in fresh gear. Put the ration in there. I did. The screen lit up. Ellis studied the readout. There's a compound in here I've never seen before. Structurally similar to a neurostabilizer, but it's active. This stuff's meant to suppress something. Maybe emotion. Maybe choice. He shut the scanner. Looked me straight in the eye. You're right to be scared. I exhaled. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was in danger. Ellis gave me a small flash drive. Keep recording. Every injection you fake. Every meal you skip. If you're caught, get this off base. Do not let them erase you. That night, I found another note. This one was folded into a coded message on page 12 of our old training manual, Ava's handwriting, disguised as margin notes. It said, Healy is tied to Black Ridge Project. Dad was digging into it. I think Mom knew. Underneath, a string of Morse. Trust no one, especially not the ones who smile too much. I went to sleep with Ava's words ringing in my head. They'd taken my sister. They were trying to take me next. But I wasn't going to break. I was going to fight. The base never really slept, but around 0300 it slowed down enough to breathe. That was when I moved. I wore a maintenance jacket I'd swiped from the laundry return, oversized, grease-stained, just enough to pass. My wristband was programmed with a false access profile, courtesy of Ellis. He had only looked at me once while copying the data. You've got one shot, he said. This keycard burns out after one use. After that, you're on your own. I was. The comms building was on the north side of the compound. It was connected to the main command center by a short tunnel and guarded by 2 officers during daytime. At night, only one stayed, and she usually took smoke breaks outside. I made it inside with 2 minutes to spare. Ellis had prepped the workstation. It was already logged in under a temp tech ID. All I had to do was plug in the drive and hit send. The files from Ava's journal. The food sample analysis. My own recordings, every fake injection, every whispered log entry. Every time I spoke to the camera in a trembling voice and begged someone out there to believe me. I sent it to an address Ellis had scribbled on a piece of duct tape and stuck to the inside of my jacket. m.ethics@defensewatch.gov. Then I wiped the station. Just like he showed me. The screen went black, and then the sirens started. Not because of me, not yet, but because I was out past curfew. I knew the timing. I had 5 minutes before they started the sweep. I was already halfway to the tunnel when the base alert lit up red. My heart pounded as I crawled into the narrow utility shaft Ellis had unlocked. It stank of old coolant and burned plastic. The light flickered overhead, and somewhere in the pipes above, steam hissed like a warning. I followed the crawlspace west, past the water lines, the old drill lockers, and into the back sector marked service only. Ava and I used to dare each other to sneak in there when we were little. She always made it farther than me. Now it was my turn. I crawled out the other side into the snow. My gloves were soaked. My knees ached. The cold bit hard, but I kept moving, sticking close to the shadows behind the generator building. Ellis had arranged everything. At 0400, a delivery truck would exit through the east gate, the one used for civilian shipments. I had 30 seconds to slip under the tarp of the cargo bed. I made it in 20, curled between boxes of sealed freeze-dried food packs. I held my breath as the gate opened. The guard's voice was muffled. A clipboard signed. The engine started again. We drove, and drove, until the lights of the base were gone. I didn't cry until I saw the mailbox. It was battered metal covered in snow, but the name was still there, carved into the wood next to it in worn block letters. Vaughn. Retired Commander Vaughn, my dad's old flight partner. He opened the door with a blanket in his hand and a shocked look on his face. I didn't even say hello. I just held out the flash drive. He took it without a word and pulled me inside. That night, I slept on a real mattress for the first time in years, and I dreamed of Ava, not empty and dull, but whole, and waiting. The world outside the base moved faster than I remembered. Within 48 hours of Vaughn sending the files to federal channels, things shifted, quietly at first, then like an avalanche. He didn't waste time. He contacted a friend at Military Internal Affairs, an investigator named Gracie Marlowe, and handed over everything. Ava's journal, the forged memos, the injection records, my comms logs, the food samples Ellis tested, everything. The woman didn't blink, just said, "This'll rattle more than a few cages." By the end of the week she had a warrant. It turned out Defense Watch, the watchdog Ellis helped us reach, had been tracking similar patterns on other bases, scattered reports of early-onset instability diagnoses in teen recruits. But ours was the first case with hard evidence. Names, documents, timelines, and most importantly, A living witness. Me. They flew me to a secure facility in Anchorage for a formal interview. Vaughn came with me. He didn't say much on the plane, just handed me an old patch from my dad's flight jacket and said, "You earned it." When the investigators asked me to speak, I told them everything. Every injection I faked. Every night Ava whispered that she felt less human. Every order my mother gave in the cold, clinical tone she used on cadets. Every strange visit from Dr. Greer, who poked and prodded like we were parts of some malfunctioning weapon. When I told them about Ava, the room went still. "Where is she now?" the lead investigator asked. "I don't know," I said. "They said she self-harmed and got transferred, but there was no facility name, no location, nothing. They made calls, lots of them. By the second day they found her. She was in a private neurological clinic just south of the Canadian border. Off-grid, no federal registry, owned by a medical subsidiary that tied back to a covert biotech group under military contract. They were calling it the Black Ridge Project. I went with them when they brought her out. She didn't recognize me at first. Her eyes were glassy, her body limp, strapped to a chair. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat down in front of her and took her hand. "It's me," I whispered. "It's Raina." I didn't stop looking. A nurse ran a scan, then another. "What did you give her?" one of the real doctors asked, furious. "She's been on a cocktail meant for long-term behavioral suppression. This stuff's not approved for human trials." They started weaning her off slowly. It would take weeks, months maybe, but they said there was no permanent damage. She'd make it back, and she'd remember. 2 days later, they arrested Captain Sloan. It happened in full uniform. During a morning briefing on the base, Ellis recorded it with his wristband. The look on her face when the MPs marched in, read the charges, and placed the cuffs around her wrists. She didn't speak, didn't resist. She just looked down like she'd known it was coming. Dr. Greer was next. He tried to claim diplomatic immunity as a civilian contractor. Didn't work. Once word spread, other families on the base came forward. Mothers, fathers, older siblings who'd been told their kids were unstable, then pushed into treatment programs with no oversight. Some hadn't seen their children in months. Some didn't even know where they'd been sent. Now they knew. Vaughn sat beside me in the briefing room where they read out the indictments. Conspiracy to commit medical abuse, forgery of federal documents, unauthorized human experimentation on military minors. There were 27 names on the list of those under investigation. My mother's was at the top. They asked if I wanted to testify. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. But not just for me. For Ava. For everyone they tried to break. Because now the silence was over, and we were finally being heard. After the trial, it took time for the dust to settle, but for once time was on our side. Ava and I were placed under Commander Vaughn's guardianship officially, through an expedited civilian military protection clause. The same system that once tried to erase us was now responsible for keeping us safe. Irony didn't taste sweet, but it was better than fear. The first few weeks at Vaughn's house were quiet. Ava mostly slept. Her body was still clearing the chemicals and her mind was stitched with gaps, but each day she came back a little more. She remembered the constellations we used to trace. She remembered Morse code. She remembered me. "I thought I was gone," she whispered one night, curled on the couch in one of Vaughn's old sweatshirts. "I thought maybe you forget too." "Never," I said. "I memorized every version of you." She smiled, small but real. We took walks sometimes, out past the treeline where the snow was thinner and the wind didn't bite so hard. She wore Dad's jacket now. Vaughn had kept it all this time, tucked in a trunk with a photo of them in their flight suits. I caught Ava standing in front of it once, just staring, not crying, not speaking, just remembering. She didn't talk much about Mom. Neither did I, but the tribunal came fast. Military justice doesn't waste time when there's federal heat. Captain Sloan stood in the courtroom like a statue, no makeup, no rank insignia, just gray fatigues and the kind of silence that tries to win back control by staying colder than the room. I testified second. They asked me about the injections, about the forged documents, about the night Ava begged me to stop and I started faking the doses. I answered every question. I didn't stutter. Then they asked if I wanted to address Captain Sloan directly. I stood. She lifted her eyes just once. "You said we were assets," I said. "You said Ava was unstable, that I needed to help control her. But she wasn't broken. You were. You chose protocol over family. You turned us into parts of a weapon." Her face didn't move. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wristband, and held it up. "This has a live feed recording," I told the panel. "The night she ordered me to take the injection. When I refused. When she said I was next to be corrected. It's all on here." The courtroom went silent. I tapped the button. The audio played, echoing cold and clear through the chamber. My mother's voice. Calm. Precise. Terrifying. By the end, even the stenographer looked pale. Captain Sloan was sentenced to 25 years. Dr. Greer got 10. Several high-ranking officers resigned within the week. More trials followed. The Black Ridge Project was shut down, officially this time, not just shuffled off the books. Ellis testified anonymously. He never wanted credit, just justice. Back at Vaughn's, Ava and I started rebuilding. She started sketching again. I started journaling, not like Ava did, all frantic ink and warning signs, but something quieter. A way to remember the pieces of us they didn't get to erase. We got matching patches made. The Morse for sister, stitched into dark green cloth. Hers on her sleeve, mine on my bag. People started calling me brave, saying I was strong. I didn't feel like either, but I was free. And Ava was free. We planted a pine tree in Vaughn's backyard one morning in Dad's memory. As we stood there in the cold, watching it catch the sun, Ava took my hand. We're not done yet, she said. I know, but for now we could rest. For now we had each other. And we were finally whole. It happened on a Tuesday. I was sitting on the back porch, watching frost melt off the railing when my wristband buzzed. No ID, just a short message sent through an encrypted channel that Ellis had helped us rebuild. Not all nodes were shut down. Black Ridge isn't dead, just scattered. There was no signature, but I knew the cadence of the code, the way the periods landed, the careful structure. It was Ellis. I read the message 3 times. Then I looked out across Vaughn's yard, where Ava was sitting cross-legged in the grass, her sketchpad balanced on her knees. She looked up and smiled like the world wasn't shifting again beneath our feet. That night, I showed her the message. She read it quietly, then flipped to a blank page in her journal and started writing. Not panicked, not scared, just steady. They'll try again, she said. Yeah, they always do. She tapped the pen against her knee. So what do we do? I didn't answer right away. Later that week, I called Ellis using a scrambled relay line. He didn't say hello, just picked up and started talking like we hadn't lost a day. There's chatter, he said. Something near Fort Keene. Quiet tests, no paperwork trail, but supply shipments flagged under shell contracts. Could be nothing. Could be Black Ridge, I said. Could be worse, he replied. You in? I didn't hesitate. Yeah, I'm in. Ava started researching civilian universities. She wanted to study bioethics, said if she could understand how people like Greer justified their work, she could stop it from happening again. She still walked slow in the mornings, still had days where she didn't speak much. But when she did, her voice was clearer than ever. I'm not looking to punish people, she told me once. I'm looking to prevent the next me. Ellis introduced us to a small group of whistleblowers, a med tech from New Mexico, a transport officer from Maine, a coder who'd cracked an old satellite log that showed unauthorized shipments to ghost spaces. We didn't have a name yet, but we had a cause. And sometimes that's enough. A month after the message, I stood on the roof of an old watchtower near the edge of Vaughn's property. From there, on a clear day, I could see the distant radio towers of our old base, cold and dead, but still standing. I pulled out my wristband, clicked to the private channel. There was no ceremony, no oath, just my voice steady and low. Let's finish what we started. The wind carried the words out into the dark. Somewhere I knew someone was listening. Maybe more than one. Maybe enough. The war wasn't over. But neither were we.